back, guys, to the second part of a transom replacement on this 22-foot Hydrosport center console. As you guys can see, the outside skin is completely removed and we are working on grinding away the rotted wood core. We use a wood carving disc that we picked up at a local Harbor Freight around here, and it was about 10 bucks. So this is essentially a chainsaw that goes on your angle grinder. So make sure that you're being super careful when using it. And then also make sure that all the rotten wood is completely gone, completely out of there, and then you leave yourself a nice clean sanded fiberglass surface to work with. But we won't bore you any longer. There won't be a super long introduction to this video, and we'll get right into the work. First, I just want to apologize. We couldn't really get good footage of us laying down the fiberglass. We were just rushing to make sure that the epoxy we were working with didn't dry on us, and it kind of became an all hands on deck situation. But we will do our best to bring you guys fiberglass footage in the future. Once we get more comfortable with it, we're able to kind of record ourselves as we're laying down the fiberglass. But anyways, here we are. We're applying the resin to the first layer of the existing fiberglass. Again, the first layer that we applied was a mix of the epoxy resin and a very small amount of the silica additive. And we kind of mixed that until it became almost a cream texture. And again, that was applied to the existing skin. We then put on a layer of chop strand to help with the adhesion. We used this aluminum roller that you see here to make sure we got any and all air bubbles completely out of there, and we were left with a nice flat surface. But essentially it was important to make sure that we completely drench this thing as the first coat to offer as much bonding strength to the first piece of plywood as we possibly could. Alright guys, so unfortunately we got some bad footage there in terms of laying this first piece of plywood down. But essentially what we had to do was go from a 3/4 inch piece of plywood originally to a 1/2 inch piece of plywood because the transom here has a curve to it. I don't know if you guys can tell here, but it's a little arc right in the center where the motor mounts, and then it goes out to be flat again on the outside here. So what we did was just took marine grade plywood, epoxied it, and then we cut the first piece into 3 segments. So 1, 2, 3, and then obviously that was to get it to fit into the existing fiberglass here. Sneak it in, and then we epoxied it. So a quick tip: if you're using epoxy resin instead of the polyester resin, don't go for the additional layer of the mat here. It is not needed. It's actually a bad idea to do that, and unfortunately I learned after the fact, after I already put it on. So if you're using epoxy, the epoxy mixed with the hardener and then the additional silicone in this case is enough. The mat is not needed. So lesson learned. From now on, we're just going to be using that mixture to put the other pieces of plywood on. We're going to fill these gaps here with the same mixer. We're just going to have it be a lot thicker. Obviously it's not an exact cut here. There's little gaps here and there, but we'll fill those in. So now the process is going to be 3 pieces. And then we have a section that's cut into 2 pieces, and then another section cut into 3 pieces. So it gives it almost a zigzag, effect here. So you don't have overlapping stress points where something can go wrong. All right, so we'll keep you updated. All right, guys, another quick tip here: if you're using epoxy resin and you want to be able to reuse your tools, pick up these yellow spatulas here. I think they're HDPE, I'm almost certain, because nothing really sticks onto HDPE. And the neat thing with these is, once the epoxy hardens, you can kind of just snap it, and then it just comes right off. It's kind of hard to do with one hand here, but we already used this big one here, and we just cleaned it up, and it's nice and clean and then ready to be reused. Same thing can go for this one. Just crack it up and then just rip off the epoxy there. So this is the final day before we begin fiberglassing. Just a quick little tip on this top surface here. It's actually a little trick that I learned from Boatworks today. All it is the epoxy resin mixed in with a silica hardener. I threw a layer on here
all the way around to kind of get a nice clean surface. Well, I should say level more so than clean. It'll be ready to sand off tomorrow, and I can get it nice and flat. So then I'll have nice little radiuses here when I go into fiberglassing. So here's what we have so far. As you can see, now we have a nice clean surface, almost. Going through the sandpaper pretty quick. As you can see, this is 40 grit, I believe, and even then it's kind of chews it up super fast. So right now we gotta go get some more sandpaper, finish this up, and then start fiberglassing. So I just want to point out on the surface where the new plywood goes onto the old existing fiberglass, I've added almost a taper here. So when you go to layer your fiberglass, you go from smaller to larger, and it'll fill that gap. So you get a nice smooth transition. It makes your life a lot easier when you go to fair it and then even out the surface. But it's getting there. We should start fiberglassing today, and then hopefully get the fairing tomorrow. Also make sure you fill up your drain plug here. We had a little bit of a gap between the plywood and where the gap for the hole is. So anyways, it's looking pretty good. So here is the fiberglass finally put together. We ran into an issue with the supplier, our local supplier of fiberglass here. We don't really live near the water. So unfortunately, they limited the cut to 6 feet increments. So what we had to do was, coming from this side, lay it down, and then it usually ended about right here. So then on another layer, you would start from this side and go back that way. Basically trying to avoid having a crease down the middle where the motor goes. And then obviously we just filled them in a little bit on each side. But besides that, it actually came up pretty good. Like I said, I did this job before using the polyester resin when I was doing the top over there, and it was a pain in the ass. The resin would dry off super quick. I didn't really have much time to work with it. Epoxy was way easier. Gave us plenty of working time. If you made little mistakes here and there, we didn't have to rush to fix it. We knew we had time to kind of fix our errors and then continue on because the epoxy was still wet. But as you can see, we went all the way over. We connected it to this part of the floor because like I said, it was cracking here just a little bit. But I think that was more because of the transom, flexing more so than a bad connection here. So here's where we are now. We started to fill in all these little tapers with the silica additive into our epoxy mixture. We unfortunately ran out, and we don't, like I said, we don't have a marine supplier, available to us nearby. So what we started to do is we actually made a trip to Home Depot, and we found some of this Bondo glass. It's a type of filler that it is meant to work on boats as well. It's not bad on the water absorption compared to regular Bondo, and this is what it looks like. It's actually very easy to apply. It's very easy to sand, and we're gonna actually need a whole bunch of it because if you take a look here, our taper really isn't as it gets a little too aggressive. We should have probably smoothed this out a little bit more before we fiberglassed. Gave it a smaller angle. Now we're kind of stuck having to overfill to kind of compensate for that misalignment here. But I would not recommend this type of filler for the final touch-up. The strands are way too long in here. It actually has fiberglass strands, and they're way too long to kind of get it nice and flat. What we're going to be using for that is Total Boat fairing. There's an A and a B, and it actually looks like this. So one is a yellowish color, the other one is a blue. Kind of mix those up until you get a nice green color, nice even spread. and we're going to be using that for the finishing touches to make everything nice and flat. We kind of kicked ourselves a little bit here. It's going to take a lot more work to figure this thing out now than we originally thought, but it'll get done. Alright guys, so quick update here. As you can see, all the fairing, well, the first set of fairing is now done. It's pretty level. Again, as I mentioned before, this stuff really is difficult to get right on the first time. It dries up pretty quick. As you can see, you have a little rough patch there. We waited too long before applying it. There's little areas like this where it's not even, but we're hoping to fill that in with the, the actual fairing stuff, the total boat. But again, you have to go through quite a bit of cans. It's difficult to source these locally. It's the Bondo glass with the, try to find the bottle here. There it is, with the hardener. So it came out pretty even. We're just gonna have to go over it with the total failure I said before. Alright guys, so we finally have something that kind of resembles a transom here. As you can see, the final fairing with the total fair is on there now. It still needs to be sanded down just a little bit, get all those rough spots out of there, make it nice and smooth. But for the most part, all of those tapered edges that we had there before are now gone, and we're left with a nice level surface that we can start sanding here. So again, we use the total boat, total fair 2-part filler. Again, you make sure you get a nice green color when you mix those two, and then you can lay it down. And as you can see here, we also started to sand with 150 grit. This stuff is super easy to sand, so you should have no issues getting a nice smooth surface out. So after weeks of being covered in fiberglass from head to toe, and unfortunately a broken hand, we finally have a boat that looks to be seaworthy. We did replace the strap there on the trailer winch just to make sure that the boat didn't go flying on us when we were going to bring it to the water. But it's all done now. We have a transom that looks to be good. We have a transom that matches the color of the rest of the boat. So luckily that last can of paint that we saved when we were working on the boat originally came in handy. We did also replace the scuppers here. As you can see, they have a nice stainless steel accent to them compared to the old scuppers, was just a piece of rubber flying around. They don't look too nice on the eye, but these just look amazing, and they function a lot better. Another thing I also want to show you guys is this cool little light bar that I made up. So instead of having to replace the lights every time you take this thing out on the water, we can have this on, bring it down to the boat ramp, and then take it off right before the water touches any of the lights. Here I did want to point out just a couple of the scratches from putting the engine on, but as you can see, everything is nice and sealed. The drain plug is also nice and sealed everywhere. We're not getting any leaks on any part of this transom. Everything is nice and tight. There'll be no water, hopefully, getting into the transom. This should last for the remaining life of this boat. And also you can see here the floor does need another coat of paint. We got it pretty dirty, but the tuner rigs are in, all the side panels are in, and we should be good to go. So let's test this thing out.
Next.